I'm Dawn Hill, host of Heart, Mind, and Purpose, a podcast where we explore what it means to live an aligned and wholehearted life. I am a professional counselor with over 25 years of experience and a deep love for meaningful conversation. I bring you honest reflections, soulful questions, and meaningful tools for managing life. Whether you're seeking clarity, connection, or simply a space to breathe, this podcast is here for you. Tune in weekly and join me on the journey.
Hi, this is Paul Gramercy, producer of Heart, Mind, and Purpose. Today, we're continuing our conversation on his brain, her brain. And if you listened to part 1, you already know that this is not about proving one gender is better than the other. It's about understanding the specializations and how those differences can show up on the way we relate, communicate, and live together. Before we jump in, I just want to say thank you for listening and supporting the show. And now here's your host, Dawn Hill.
You know, one of the first things I want to say and keep saying is that the differences between his brain and her brains are not about superiority or inferiority. They are about specialization. We are wired in unique ways that can complement each other beautifully if we understand them. Now, some of what I'll share might make you nod your head and think, yes, that's so true. Other parts might make you think, huh, what? Not so much for me. And that's okay, because these are common patterns, and there are always exceptions to those patterns. But if you've ever thought, wow, the opposite sex can feel like a completely different species sometimes, this one's for you. Let's jump in. We're going to talk about the differences of how his brain and her brains perceive and process the world. Men and women really do take in and process sensory information differently. Sometimes it's so different that it can feel like the other person's from another planet. Her brain is more likely to live in a space of relationship and connection, while his brain is more likely to spend time in projects and tasks. Her brain has a strong drive to empathize and step into another's shoes, while his brain has a strong drive to systemize, to figure out how things work and put them in order. There are differences in how we respond to stressors. Here's one of the biggest differences I've seen. When stress hits his brain, he is wired for competition. He is more likely to retreat to what I've called the nothing box, that mental space where nothing is happening, before tackling the stressor. Her brain, on the other hand, is wired for cooperation and negotiation. She will most likely talk about the stress, and often with more than one person. As far as emotional responses and communications go, there are some differences. Because of our anatomical, chemical, and hormonal differences, it is no surprise we sometimes hit roadblocks in communication. For his brains, conversations often focus on things like technology or sports. Emotional situations are processed in one hemisphere of the brain, and there's a smaller portion of the brain dedicated to processing emotions, so it can be harder to identify them and then verbalize them. And language tends to be concrete, direct, and precise, facts over feelings. On the other hand, her brain's conversations are more about relationships and connections. Emotions are processed in both hemispheres in the brain at the same time. Processing and memory centers are larger, more active, and more strongly tied to the verbal center. Therefore, she's less concerned with perfect word choice and more concerned with building connection. In short, his brain thrives on the language of action. Her brain thrives on their language of relationship. So communication is different between us for many reasons. So how about how our sexual wiring is different? When it comes to intimacy, there are some fundamental biological differences in how men's and women's brains tend to be wired. But again, these are patterns, not absolutes. There's plenty of overlap and individuality. In general, men are more often physically oriented, while women tend to be more emotionally and relationally oriented. For him, physical closeness can often be the doorway to emotional closeness, while for her, feeling emotionally connected is often what opens the door to physical closeness. We're a little bit upside down. Men are more likely to be visually stimulated. Images, sight, What they see with their eyes can spark desire quickly. Women, on the other hand, are usually more holistically stimulated. Feelings of safety, feeling cherished, smells, the tone of voice, touch, and yes, even the words expressed. It is often the whole package that speaks to her. Men often feel ready to initiate more frequently and sometimes anytime, anywhere. Women typically initiate less often, not because they don't value intimacy or are not interested, but because the context matters deeply. Emotional connection, environment, energy level, and how the relationship feels that day. The bottom line is, men often enjoy sex as a primary way of connecting. It is how they feel loved, valued, and alive. Women often enjoy intimacy as the fuller package. Emotional connection, safety, affection, and closeness that makes physical intimacy meaningful. When we understand that sex and intimacy are both needs, just emphasized differently, it's not about who is right, it's more about how to honor the other's wiring. There are some basic differences for the language of action versus the language of relationship. His brains thrive on the language of action. Her brains thrive on the language of relationship. Here's a simple example. When upset or facing an emotional situation, his brains will often talk to themselves, internally processing until they find a solution, while her brains will often talk to others, externally processing until they feel heard and understood. Here's a quote from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It holds some humor and some truth. The man may be the head of the family, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn it whatever direction she wants. That was the mom, Maria. So we need to value both parts, the head and the neck. They can't work independent of each other without pain. They can work in harmony, and things will go well. It's how we're designed and wired. Let's talk about some common areas of specialization. Remembering again, these are not rigid rules, but there are exceptions to the typical characteristics. So regarding his brains for conquest and hers for nurture, his brain often relates through dominance, competition, and achievement, and her brain tends towards empathy, cooperation, and understanding. His brains need affirmation, often from other men, especially early on in life from their father, and they thrive towards the heroic drive to be the best. Her brain is more responsive to emotional safety and connection. Regarding his brain for provision and her brain for security, it is important to his brains that they are successful in providing for their wives, and this is often essential to their feelings of self-worth. Many people do not realize how deep and powerful a man's need to be recognized and admired for successfully providing for his family really is. Yes, I know that sounds like something from the 1950s, and it does still hold true. However, there are some things that have changed. We have a broader definition of provision. It is not only about earning money anymore. Many men today see providing as also meeting emotional needs, being present as a father, or contributing in non-financial ways like home care or shared parenting. The idea of successfully providing is more personalized, shaped by each man's values, family situation, and cultural background. Also currently, there's cultural awareness and role flexibility. In some families, the woman is the primary breadwinner, and the man's provision role is expressed through other contributions. Social expectations are slowly expanding to affirm men who support their families in non-traditional ways. Bottom line for his brains, the need for respect, admiration, and acknowledgement is still deeply ingrained for many men and often tied to their sense of identity and self-worth. What has evolved is the meaning of providing and the recognition that this drive varies by personality, culture, and family dynamics. For her brain, security isn't just about money. It's a deeper need to know that her husband truly loves and cares for her. I'd say the deepest need for most of her brains is to feel safe. And safety will carry her through a lot of hiccups in a relationship and in life. Here's a look about how his brain is wired for respect and her brains are wired for love. That's usually what the definition is, but I think about love for most her brains as really is the word safety. It's feeling safe on all levels of who we are really help us feel secure in the sense that we are being loved. Now, because of his brain's high levels of testosterone and vasopressin, he naturally responds to respect, admiration, and approval. Both his brain and her brain need emotional security. That hasn't changed. The difference is in what helps each one feel it. For many men, emotional security comes from peace, stability, and a home environment that feels steady and supportive. While for many women, it is built through connection, talking things through, sharing experiences, and nurturing relationships. Of course, these aren't hard and fast rules. Some men recharge through conversation, and some women crave quiet space. But on average, our brains are still wired a little differently in how we find that sense of all is well. So as we wrap up today's episode, I hope you hear this. The differences between his brain and her brain aren't meant to divide us. They're meant to complement each other. When we understand this unique wiring, we can stop expecting the other person to think, feel, or process exactly as we do. And instead, we can learn to appreciate the ways our strengths fit together. If this episode sparked some aha moments, or maybe even oh, that makes so much sense, I'd love to hear about it. And remember, the goal isn't to change the other person's wiring. It is to learn how to connect with it. Until next time, may you be kind in your heart, clear in your mind, and grounded in your purpose. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for tuning in to Heart, Mind, and Purpose with Dawn Hill. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review to help others find us. You can learn more about the show by visiting dawnmariehill.com and click on the tab that says Heart, Mind, and Purpose. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.